My daughter sold their house for $500,000 and gave all the money to my son-in-law to invest in his so-called digital business. 2 weeks later, they came asking me for a place to live, and I answered, no. My son-in-law punched me in the face. That same day, I made a decision. I called my lawyer and his next move. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm 62 years old, and I never thought I'd see the day when my own son-in-law would raise his hand against me. But there I was, standing in my doorway with blood trickling from my nose, watching Henry's face twist with rage while my daughter Leah stood behind him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad, please," Leah whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have nowhere else to go." 3 hours earlier, they'd shown up at my door looking like refugees from their own life. Leah's hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Henry kept pacing back and forth on my porch, running his hands through his hair and muttering under his breath. I'd never seen him this agitated before. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping aside to let them in. That's when the whole story came tumbling out. 2 weeks ago, they'd sold their beautiful 4-bedroom house for $500,000. $500,000. The house I'd helped them buy. The one where I'd watched my granddaughter take her first steps before she moved away for college. Gone. Henry has this incredible business opportunity, Leah explained, her eyes bright with what I now realize was desperation disguised as hope. "Digital marketing, Dad. The future is online, and Henry's got connections with these amazing investors." I watched Henry nod enthusiastically, but something in his eyes made my stomach turn. I'd seen that look before. In my late brother's eyes when he was gambling away his savings, convinced the next bet would solve all his problems. "So you sold your house," I said slowly, "to invest in Henry's business." "It's not just a business, Bruce," Henry interrupted. And I noticed how he never called me Dad like he used to. "This is generational wealth we're talking about. In 5 years, Leah won't have to work another day in her life." But here they were, 3 hours later, telling me the money was gone. All of it. The investors had disappeared, the business was a shell, and Henry was explaining it all away with technical jargon I couldn't follow and didn't believe. "These things happen in business," he kept saying, his voice getting louder with each explanation. "Market fluctuations, regulatory issues. It's temporary. Temporary. $500,000, gone, and he called it temporary. We just need a place to stay while we figure things out," Leah pleaded. "Just for a few weeks, maybe a month." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. When had she become so thin? When had those worry lines appeared around her eyes? She'd lost weight, and not in a healthy way. Her skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress. "Leah, honey," I said gently, "you know I love you, but I can't enable this." That's when Henry's mask slipped. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Enable what exactly? Your daughter needing help from her own father?" "I'm not talking to you," I said firmly. "I'm talking to my daughter." Henry stepped closer and I could smell alcohol on his breath. It wasn't even noon. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Sitting in your nice house, judging us for taking risks." "Henry, please," Leah whispered, grabbing his arm. He shook her off. "No, Leah, your father needs to understand something. We're family. Family helps family, and right now, we need help." I kept my voice calm, though my heart was racing. "And I've helped. I helped you buy that house. I helped pay for your wedding. I helped when you couldn't make car payments 3 years ago. But this isn't help. This is enabling bad decisions." "Bad decisions?" Henry's voice rose to a shout. "You have no idea what you're talking about, old man. You've never taken a risk in your life. You've never built anything, never dreamed big." "Henry, stop," Leah begged, but he was beyond listening. "You know what your problem is, Bruce? You're small. Small mind, small dreams, small life, and you want to keep everyone else small too." That's when I said it, the word that lit the fuse. No. Just that. One word. But Henry heard it like a gunshot. "What did you say?" I said, "No, you can't stay here. I won't watch you drag my daughter down any further." The punch came so fast I didn't see it coming. One moment I was standing in my doorway, the next I was stumbling backward, my hand automatically going to my nose as warm blood began to flow. Leah screamed. Henry stood there, his fist still clenched, his chest heaving like he'd just run a marathon. For a moment we all froze in that tableau. The assault, the victim, the witness. "Oh God," Leah whispered. "Oh God, Henry, what did you do?" But Henry wasn't looking at her. He was staring at me with pure hatred. "You deserve that, you selfish old bastard. Your own daughter is homeless and you slammed the door in her face." I touched my nose gingerly. It wasn't broken, but it hurt like hell. More than the physical pain, though, was the realization of what had just happened. This man who'd sat at my dinner table for 5 years, who'd called me Dad, who'd promised to love and protect my daughter, had just punched me in my own home. "Get out," I said quietly. "Dad, please," Leah started. Both of you, get out, now. As they walked away, I heard Henry muttering something about ungrateful and selfish, but I didn't care. I was already reaching for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Robert Henley, my lawyer for the past 15 years. A man who'd helped me through my divorce, my business partnerships, and my retirement planning. A man I trusted completely. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. Bruce, what's wrong? You sound shaken. I told him everything, from the lost money to the punch. Robert listened without interrupting, which had always been one of his strengths. When I finished, there was a long pause. Bruce, Robert said finally, his voice grave, I need to see you immediately. There are things about Henry you need to know. Things I should have told you months ago. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. What kind of things? Not over the phone. Can you come to my office now? I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. My nose was swollen. There was dried blood on my shirt, and my hands were shaking slightly, but Robert's urgency cut through my shock. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the punch was just the beginning. Whatever Robert needed to tell me, it was going to change everything. Robert's office felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just the ice in my veins as I sat across from his mahogany desk. He'd handed me tissues for my nose and insisted on taking photos of my injuries, which should have been my first clue about how serious this was about to get. Bruce, Robert began, opening a thick manila folder. 6 months ago, you asked me to run a background check on Henry when he started pressuring Leah about refinancing the house. Do you remember? I nodded. I'd been worried about Henry's sudden interest in tapping into their home equity for various business opportunities. Something had felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Well, what I found was concerning. But you told me to hold off on sharing it unless something urgent happened. Robert's eyes met mine. I'd say getting punched in your own home qualifies as urgent. He slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Henry, but he looked different somehow. Younger, wearing an expensive suit, standing next to a woman who wasn't my daughter. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and obvious wealth displayed in her jewelry and clothing. This is Henry with Margaret Davidson, taken 2 years before he met Leah. Margaret was 68, a widow with substantial assets. Henry was 34. My stomach began to sink. Margaret died last year. Massive heart attack, according to the death certificate. But here's the interesting part. 6 months before she died, she'd transferred nearly all her assets to Henry. Her children are still fighting it in court. Robert pulled out another photograph. This one showed Henry with a different woman, this time a brunette who looked to be in her 40s. Linda Carruthers, age 52, met Henry 3 years before Margaret, lost her house, her savings, and her jewelry business to him. He convinced her to invest everything in a revolutionary tech startup. The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear, but Robert wasn't finished. Sarah Chen, age 49, Jennifer Walsh, 55, Diane Morrison, 61. Each name came with a photograph, each woman looking happy and hopeful standing next to Henry. The same story, Bruce, every single time. Older women, financially comfortable, trusting. I stared at the photos spread across Robert's desk like evidence in a murder case. How did you find all this? Henry Richardson isn't his real name. He's been using variations of it for the past 8 years. His actual name is Harold Rickman, and he has a very interesting history with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Robert handed me a thick document. The FBI letterhead made my hands shake as I tried to focus on the words. They've been tracking him for years, but he's careful. He never technically commits fraud. Everything is done through emotional manipulation and legal document signing. The women give him the money willingly, but they can't prove intent. Not criminal intent, no, but there's definitely a pattern. And Bruce, there's something else. Robert's voice dropped lower. 3 months ago, Henry visited my colleague David Pembroke, asking about inheritance law. Specifically, he wanted to know about spousal rights to inherited assets in cases where the beneficiary dies unexpectedly. The room started spinning slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair. What exactly did he ask? He wanted to know if Leah inherited your estate, would her husband have automatic access to those assets? He also asked about life insurance policies and how quickly they pay out. I felt sick, not just from the punch or the shock, but from the realization of how completely I'd been played, how completely Leah had been played. There's more, Robert continued, his voice gentler now. I had my investigator look into this digital business Henry claimed to be investing in. Bruce, it doesn't exist. There are no investors, no company, no business registration. The $500,000, it's gone, transferred to offshore accounts that can't be traced. So the money is just gone completely. And based on his pattern with other women, this was always the plan. Get Leah to liquidate her major asset, take the money, then move on to the next target. I thought about Leah's pale face, her thin frame, the worry lines around her eyes. But he's still with her, because he's not done yet. Bruce, I need you to understand something very important. Based on his questions about inheritance law, I believe Henry's ultimate target isn't just Leah's assets, it's yours. The words hit me like another punch. Mine? Robert nodded grimly. Think about it. Leah is your only child. If something happened to you, she'd inherit everything. And if something then happened to her? You're saying he might hurt her? I'm saying his previous pattern suggests he moves on once the money is gone. But with Leah, he hasn't moved on. Why? Because the real prize isn't the house money, it's your estate. And now that they've lost everything, he's desperate. I sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what Robert was telling me. 5 years. Henry had been planning this for 5 years. Slowly working his way into our family, earning our trust, positioning himself for the ultimate score. The punch today, I said slowly, that wasn't anger about being refused shelter. No, Robert agreed. That was panic. His plan is falling apart and desperate people do desperate things. Robert opened another file. Bruce, I need to ask you something and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Has Henry ever asked you about your will? About your health? About whether you take any medications? The question made my skin crawl, but as I thought back, memories began surfacing. Henry asking about my blood pressure medication, Henry suggesting I should live a little and not be so careful about my diet, Henry joking about how old guys like me should enjoy life because you never know what might happen. Jesus, I whispered. I'm not trying to scare you unnecessarily, Robert said, but based on what happened to Margaret Davidson, I think you need to take precautions. Immediately, he pulled out a legal document. This is a restraining order. I can have it filed today. It will legally prevent Henry from coming near you or your property. What about Leah? Robert's expression grew sad. Bruce, I know this is your daughter, but she's chosen her side. Every one of Henry's previous victims had family members who tried to warn them. They all chose Henry over their families right up until he disappeared with their money. I stared at the restraining order, knowing that signing it meant essentially cutting ties with my daughter. But the alternative, waiting to see how far Henry would go, seemed infinitely worse. There's one more thing, Robert said quietly. If you sign this restraining order, if you protect yourself legally, Henry's going to escalate. He's going to try to get to your assets through Leah. And if she's as manipulated as his previous victims, she's going to help him. What do you mean? Robert pulled out one final document. This morning, before you called, I received a request from another law firm. They want to schedule a meeting about your estate planning. The request came through Leah. My heart stopped. She's already trying to access my will. It appears so. Bruce, I think Henry has been planning this for months. The house sale, the fake business, coming to you for help. It was all designed to create a crisis that would force you to either take them in or make financial provisions for them. I thought about Leah's tears, her desperate pleas, the way she'd begged me to help them. Had any of it been real, or had she been coached, manipulated, turned into Henry's accomplice? What do I do? Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. First, we file the restraining order. Second, we need to discuss changing your will immediately. And third, he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Third, you need to decide how far you're willing to go to protect yourself. Because, Bruce, I don't think this ends with a simple restraining order. I think Henry's going to fight back, and he's going to use Leah as his weapon. As I sat there staring at the photos of Henry's previous victims, I realized that the punch to my face was just the opening shot in what was about to become a war for my life savings, my legacy, and possibly my life itself. The restraining order was filed by 3 o'clock that afternoon. But Robert insisted I stay at his office while his investigator, Marcus Webb, presented what he'd discovered in the past 24 hours. Marcus was a former FBI agent with tired eyes and the kind of methodical patience that comes from years of unraveling financial crimes. Mr. Holloway, Marcus began, spreading documents across Robert's conference table. What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process. Your son-in-law has been very busy. The first document he placed in front of me made my blood freeze. It was a loan application from First National Bank dated 3 weeks ago. Leah's signature was at the bottom, requesting a personal loan for $75,000 using my house as collateral. This can't be right, I said, my voice barely steady. Leah doesn't have any legal claim to my property. No, she doesn't, Marcus agreed. But according to this application, you'd already signed a quitclaim deed transferring partial ownership to her. Look at page 4. There it was. My signature, apparently notarized, transferring 25% ownership of my home to Leah. The problem was I'd never signed any such document. It's forged, I said immediately. We know, but it's a very good forgery. Good enough that the bank approved the loan application and deposited $75,000 into a joint account that Leah and Henry opened 2 days after they sold their house. Robert leaned forward. Bruce, this means Henry has been planning this for weeks, possibly months. While he was convincing Leah to sell their house for his fake business, he was simultaneously setting up a way to access your assets as backup. Marcus pulled out more documents. It gets worse. This is a power of attorney document, also bearing your forged signature, giving Leah the right to make financial decisions on your behalf in case of incapacitation. And this? He slid another paper across. is a medical directive stating that you've been diagnosed with early-stage dementia and that Leah should be consulted on all major decisions. I stared at the papers, feeling like I was looking at evidence of my own murder. How is this possible? How could they forge all of this without anyone noticing? Because Henry's done this before, Marcus explained. We found similar forged documents in the Margaret Davidson case and 2 others. He has access to someone who specializes in document fraud. Probably someone he met during one of his previous schemes. But wouldn't the bank verify these documents? Robert nodded grimly. They should have. But remember, Henry's not stupid. He chose a small branch bank where the loan officer was new and probably didn't follow proper verification procedures. The $75,000 loan was approved based on these forged documents, so they have $75,000 of my money. Marcus corrected. That money was transferred to the same offshore accounts as the house sale proceeds. It's gone, just like the $500,000. I felt dizzy. In a matter of weeks, Henry had stolen $575,000 using my daughter as his accomplice, willing or unwilling. There's more, Marcus continued, and I wasn't sure I could handle more. We found evidence that Henry attempted to take out a life insurance policy on you, with Leah as the beneficiary and himself as the alternate. The application was rejected because you'd need to be present for the medical exam. But the fact that he tried, he's planning to kill me, I said flatly. We can't prove intent, Robert said carefully, but the pattern is extremely concerning. Forged documents giving him access to your assets, fake medical records suggesting you're mentally incompetent, attempts to ensure your life. It's exactly what happened with Margaret Davidson in the months before she died. Marcus pulled out a photograph. This is Margaret's grandson, David. I spoke with him yesterday. He said his grandmother started acting strangely in her final months, signing documents she didn't understand, making financial decisions that made no sense. The family thought it was dementia, but now they suspect she was being drugged. Drugged? Small amounts of prescription medications that can cause confusion and memory loss. Nothing that would show up in a standard autopsy, but enough to make an elderly person compliant and suggestible. I thought about the last few months, trying to remember if I'd felt unusually tired or confused after visits with Leah and Henry. There had been a few instances where I'd felt foggy after they'd brought me dinner, but I'd attributed it to age and stress. The good news, Robert said, is that now we know what we're dealing with. We can protect you. The restraining order is just the beginning. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Holloway, I need to ask you some specific questions about your recent interactions with Henry and Leah. Have they brought you food or drinks in the past few months? Have they ever insisted you take medication or supplements? As I thought back, more memories surfaced. Henry bringing me special coffee that he'd bought from some expensive shop. Leah insisting I try some herbal supplements that would help with energy. The way they'd both seemed disappointed when I didn't finish drinks they'd prepared for me. Jesus Christ, I whispered. We need to get you to a doctor immediately, Robert said. We need blood tests to see if there are any substances in your system. But if they were drugging me, wouldn't I have noticed? Marcus shook his head. These substances are designed to be subtle. You might feel a little tired, a little confused, but nothing dramatic enough to raise alarm bells. The goal isn't to incapacitate you immediately. It's to make you gradually more compliant and trusting. Robert was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling Dr. Patterson. He can see you this afternoon and he's discreet. As Robert made the call, Marcus continued laying out documents. There's something else you need to know. We found communications between Henry and at least 3 different law firms over the past month. He's been shopping around trying to find someone who will help him challenge your mental competency. On what grounds? Based on the forged medical directive claiming you have dementia. If he could get a court to declare you mentally incompetent, Leah would become your legal guardian and Henry would have access to everything. The scope of the conspiracy was overwhelming. This wasn't just a son-in-law trying to steal money. This was an elaborate, months-long plan to systematically strip me of my assets, my autonomy, and possibly my life. Where's Leah in all this? I asked. Does she know what he's doing? Marcus and Robert exchanged a look. That's the million-dollar question, Marcus said. In some of his previous cases, the women were completely unaware they were being used. In others, they became willing accomplices once they were sufficiently isolated and manipulated. Based on what we found today, Robert added, Leah signed loan applications using forged documents of your signature. Either she knew they were forged, or Henry convinced her you'd already signed them privately. I thought about my daughter's face when they'd come to ask for help, the desperation in her eyes, the way she'd pleaded with me. Had that been genuine emotion? Or was she already so deep into Henry's web that she couldn't tell truth from lies anymore? There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly. We've found evidence that Henry has been researching your daily routines. Coffee shop visits, grocery store trips, your morning walks, He knows your schedule better than you probably realize. Why would he need that information? Because, Robert said grimly, if his other plans fail, if he can't access your money through legal manipulation or fake documents, he might try a more direct approach. The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Henry wasn't just after my money. He was preparing for every possible scenario, including ones that might require me to be out of the picture permanently. Dr. Patterson's nurse called back within 10 minutes. I could come in immediately for blood work and a comprehensive examination. As I prepared to leave Robert's office, he handed me a small device that looked like a key fob. Panic button, he explained. Direct line to the police. Keep it with you at all times. As I walked to my car, I realized that 24 hours ago, my biggest worry had been whether to help my daughter through a financial crisis. Now I was carrying a panic button because my own son-in-law might be planning to kill me. But there was something else growing alongside the fear, a cold, calculating anger. Henry thought he was dealing with a confused old man he could manipulate and eventually eliminate. He had no idea that he'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 40 years building a successful business by outthinking people exactly like him. The blood tests would tell us if I'd been drugged. The restraining order would provide legal protection. But what Henry didn't know yet was that I wasn't going to be content with just defending myself. I was going to destroy him. Dr. Patterson's blood tests confirmed what we'd suspected. Low levels of lorazepam and diphenhydramine, medications that would cause drowsiness and confusion when combined, but in doses small enough to seem like natural aging effects. I'd been systematically drugged for at least 2 months. The good news, Dr. Patterson explained as we reviewed the results, is that these substances clear your system relatively quickly. You should feel more alert within a few days. The bad news is that this level of premeditation suggests whoever did this was planning something significant. I drove home from the doctor's office with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The fog that had been clouding my thoughts was already lifting, and with it came a sharp, focused rage. Henry had been poisoning me while sitting at my dinner table, shaking my hand, calling me Dad. But my anger was nothing compared to what I felt when I pulled into my driveway and saw Leah's car parked on the street. She was sitting on my front porch steps, and for a moment I felt a stab of the old paternal instinct. She looked so small, so lost. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and she'd been crying. Despite everything I'd learned about Henry's manipulation, despite the forged documents and the stolen money, she was still my daughter. Dad, she said as I approached, her voice hoarse. I know you don't want to see me, but I had to come. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, keeping distance between us. The panic button Robert had given me felt heavy in my pocket. Where's Henry? He's at a friend's place. Dad, I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday. Henry feels terrible about hitting you. Does he? I asked, studying her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate, but there was something else there, a rehearsed quality to her words that made my stomach clench. He's been under so much stress with the business failing, and when you refused to help us, he just snapped. It's not like him, Dad. You know it's not. I sat down on the bottom step, maintaining distance but showing I was willing to listen. Leah, tell me about the loan you took out using my house as collateral. Her face went white. What loan? The $75,000 loan from First National Bank. The one where you used my forged signature to claim I'd given you partial ownership of this house. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. But her eyes darted away from mine, and her hands started shaking. Henry handles all our financial stuff. I just sign what he tells me to sign. There it was, the admission I'd been dreading. My daughter had been signing documents without reading them, trusting Henry completely. But was she truly innocent, or had she chosen willful ignorance? Leah, honey, I said gently, when you signed those bank documents, did you read them? Henry said they were refinancing papers for the house we sold. He said it was just paperwork to make sure the sale went through properly. But they weren't refinancing papers. They were loan applications using my property as collateral. Leah, that money is gone. Henry stole it just like he stole the $500,000 from your house sale. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. No, that's not. The business is just going through a rough patch. Henry says it happens all the time with startups. There is no business, Leah. There never was. Henry made it all up. You're lying. The words exploded out of her with such force that I flinched. You've never liked Henry. You've never given him a chance, and now you're making up stories to turn me against him. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photographs Marcus had given me. Henry with Margaret Davidson, with Linda Carruthers, with all the other women he'd swindled. Then explain these. Leah stared at the photos, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. These could be anyone. You could have photoshopped these. Leah, listen to yourself. You're defending a man who punched your father in the face, a man who's stolen everything you own. He didn't steal anything. she screamed, jumping to her feet. You don't understand business, Dad. You never took risks. You never tried to build something bigger. Henry's building something amazing, and you're too small-minded to see it. The words felt like physical blows. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone after her mother died, defending the man who was systematically destroying both our lives. Leah, I said quietly, I need you to look at me and tell me the truth. Have you been putting anything in my food or drinks when you visit? Anything Henry gave you to help me relax or feel better? Her face crumpled, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the daughter I knew. Dad, please don't ask me that. That's not a denial, Henry said. He said you were getting confused, forgetting things. He said the supplements would help with your memory. What supplements, Leah? Just herbal stuff. Natural things to help with cognitive function. He got them from a health food store. I felt sick. She'd been drugging me, but she'd believed she was helping. Henry had convinced her that I was declining mentally and that she was being a caring daughter by medicating me without my knowledge. Honey, those weren't supplements. They were prescription medications designed to make me confused and compliant. Henry was drugging me through you. Leah stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind her eyes, the battle between the truth and the reality Henry had constructed for her. No, she whispered. No, that's not. Henry wouldn't. He would. He has. And he's using you to do it. She started backing away from me, shaking her head violently. You're trying to turn me against my husband. You've always been jealous that I found someone who loves me. Leah, I'm trying to save you from a man who's going to destroy you and then disappear, just like he did to all those other women. Stop, she screamed. Stop lying about him. Henry loves me. He married me. He chose me. He chose your money, honey. He chose your access to me. That's when she said the words that broke my heart completely. If I have to choose between you and Henry, I choose Henry. He's my family now. I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and realized that I'd already lost her. Henry had done such a thorough job of isolation and manipulation that she couldn't see truth anymore. Then we have nothing more to talk about, I said quietly. Dad, wait. Her voice became pleading again. You don't have to like Henry, but you could still help us. Just a loan, just enough to get us back on our feet. I'll pay you back, I promise. With what money, Leah? You don't have a house, you don't have savings, and Henry's business doesn't exist. We'll figure it out. We always do. I stood up slowly, my heart breaking with each word I was about to say. No, honey, you won't figure it out, and I won't be here to catch you when Henry disappears. What do you mean? I mean I'm changing my will. Everything I plan to leave you is going to charity. If you want to stay with Henry, that's your choice. But I won't fund your destruction. Leah's face went through a series of emotions, shock, disbelief, and finally, rage. You can't do that. I'm your daughter. I'm your only family. Family doesn't drug each other, Leah. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't choose a con man over their own father. Henry said you might do this, she said, her voice turning cold. He said you were vindictive and controlling, and if we didn't do exactly what you wanted, you'd punish us. Henry said that because he knew this day was coming. He's been preparing you for it. Leah pulled out her phone. I'm calling my lawyer. You can't just cut me out of your will because you don't like my husband. Actually, I can. It's my money, Leah. I earned it, I saved it, and I get to decide what happens to it. We'll fight this, Dad. Henry knows lawyers, too. As she walked away, phone pressed to her ear, I realized that Robert had been right. This wouldn't end with a simple restraining order. Henry was going to use my own daughter as a weapon against me, and she was going to let him. Standing on my porch watching my daughter drive away to plan legal action against me, I understood that the fight for my assets was just beginning. But more than that, I understood that I was truly alone now. The little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. That night I called Robert and told him to draw up the new will immediately. If Leah wanted to choose Henry over me, she'd have to live with the consequences. Both of them would. The new will was signed and notarized within 48 hours. Robert had worked through the weekend to ensure it was ironclad, with multiple safeguards against any claims of mental incompetence or undue influence. Every penny of my estate would go to the American Cancer Society, with a specific clause stating that this decision was made in sound mind and with full knowledge of my daughter's circumstances and choices. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The first legal salvo came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous-looking process server who apologized twice before handing me the thick envelope. Inside was a petition for guardianship filed by Leah Richardson. She'd legally changed her name to match Henry's latest alias. The petition claimed I was suffering from dementia, that I was being manipulated by unscrupulous advisors, meaning Robert, and that I needed immediate protection from my own poor judgment. Attached were the forged medical records Henry had created, along with sworn statements from 3 people I'd never heard of, all claiming to have witnessed my my deteriorating mental state. It's completely fabricated, Robert assured me as we reviewed the documents in his office. But Henry's lawyer is good. They're painting you as a confused elderly man who's being taken advantage of by a greedy attorney. Can they actually get guardianship? They can try. The hearing is scheduled for next month, which gives us time to prepare. But Bruce, this is going to get ugly. They're going to challenge everything, your mental state, your financial decisions, even your relationship with me. That afternoon, I received my first taste of how ugly it would get. I was at the grocery store when I noticed people staring. A woman in the produce section whispered something to her husband while looking directly at me. The cashier, who'd known me for years, seemed uncomfortable during our usually friendly exchange. When I got home, I found a note taped to my front door. Shame on you for abandoning your daughter in her time of need. What kind of father are you? It took me a moment to understand what was happening. Then I remembered something Marcus had mentioned about Henry's previous campaigns. He didn't just steal money, he destroyed reputations. I called Robert immediately. They're spreading rumors about me in town. What kind of rumors? That I'm a heartless father who cut off my daughter for marrying someone I didn't like. Robert sighed. Henry's used this tactic before. He portrays his victims as villains and himself, and his current target as innocent victims. It's part of isolating you from potential support systems. Over the next week, the Whisper campaign intensified. My longtime barber mentioned that he'd heard I was having some problems with family. The woman at the coffee shop I'd frequented for 10 years asked if I was doing okay, in a tone that suggested she'd heard I wasn't. Even my doctor's receptionist looked at me with pity when I arrived for my regular appointment. But the real blow came when my neighbor, Janet Morrison, knocked on my door on Friday evening. Janet and I had been friends for 15 years. She'd brought me casseroles after my surgery last year, and I'd shoveled her walkway during the blizzard. "Bruce," she said, her voice careful and concerned, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." "Of course." "Leah came to see me yesterday. She's very worried about you. She says you've been acting strangely, making irrational financial decisions, and that you might be getting taken advantage of." I felt my stomach drop. "Janet, you've known me for 15 years. Do I seem confused or irrational to you?" "Well, no," she admitted. But Leah seemed so genuinely concerned. She said you'd changed your will impulsively and that you might not be thinking clearly. Did she mention that her husband punched me in the face? Or that they forged my signature to steal $75,000? Janet's eyes widened. "What? No, she said you were upset about some business investments that didn't work out." "Janet, my son-in-law is a con man. He's stolen nearly $600,000 from us and is now trying to get control of my assets by claiming I'm mentally incompetent." But Leah seemed so convincing, sincere. "That's because she's been brainwashed. Henry has convinced her that I'm the problem." Janet left looking troubled and uncertain, which was exactly what Henry wanted. Doubt, confusion, people questioning whether I was the victim or the villain in this story. The psychological warfare escalated when I received a call from my granddaughter, Emma. She was 23, living in California, and I hadn't spoken to her in months. Her voice was cold when she called. "Grandpa, Mom told me what you did." "What did she tell you?" "That you refused to help her when she was homeless. That you cut her out of your will because you don't like Henry. That you're being influenced by lawyers who want your money." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of Henry's manipulation reaching even to the next generation. "Emma, has your mother told you that Henry stole all their money? That he punched me? That he's been drugging me?" "She said you might say things like that. She said the stress has made you paranoid and that you're making up stories about Henry." "Sweetheart, I'm your grandfather. I've never lied to you. Why would I start now?" There was a long pause. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Mom's crying all the time. She says Henry's trying to find work, but you're spreading lies about him to potential employers." That was news to me, but it fit Henry's pattern of staying one step ahead of exposure. "Emma, I want you to do something for me. I want you to research Henry Richardson online, look up his previous marriages, his business history, then decide for yourself who's telling the truth." Mom said you might ask me to do that. She said you'd try to turn me against Henry with fake evidence. I realized then how thoroughly Henry had prepared for this. He'd given Leah responses to every possible truth I might tell, framing everything as evidence of my mental decline or vindictive nature. "I love you, Emma," I said quietly. "Whatever else happens, remember that." "I love you too, Grandpa, but I think you need help." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the silence of a house that had once been filled with family laughter. Henry hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen my relationships, my reputation, my legacy. The final straw came when Robert called with news about the guardianship hearing. "They've hired Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist, to evaluate your mental state. She's scheduled to interview you next week. Is that good or bad?" "Potentially potentially very bad. Dr. Chen has testified in several guardianship cases where the petitioners won. She has a reputation for finding cognitive decline even in borderline cases. They're buying an expert witness? It's hard to prove, but the pattern is suspicious. What we need to do is get our own evaluation first. Dr. Patterson has agreed to conduct a comprehensive cognitive assessment, and we'll have those results before Dr. Chen sees you. That weekend, I underwent 4 hours of psychological and cognitive testing. Dr. Patterson put me through memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and detailed interviews about my medical history and current mental state. "Bruce," he said when we finished, "I can state categorically that you show no signs of dementia, cognitive decline, or mental incompetence. Your test scores are actually above average for your age group. Will that be enough to fight the guardianship petition?" "It should be, but you need to understand what you're up against. Henry and Leah aren't just trying to prove you're incompetent. They're trying to prove that anyone who believes you is also suspect. They're going to attack Robert's motives, question Dr. Patterson's objectivity, and paint everyone who supports you as part of some conspiracy." Monday morning brought another legal document, a motion to freeze my assets pending the guardianship hearing. Henry's lawyer argued that I was at risk of being manipulated into giving away my money and that my assets needed protection. "Can they actually freeze my accounts?" I asked Robert. "They can try. We'll fight it, but it shows how desperate they're getting. If they can't get guardianship, they'll try to tie up your money in legal proceedings until you're too exhausted to fight anymore." That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even Robert. I called a press conference. Well, not exactly a press conference. I called the local newspaper and asked if they'd be interested in interviewing a local businessman whose son-in-law was trying to steal his estate through guardianship fraud. The reporter, Sarah Martinez, was young and hungry for a real story. When I showed her the evidence, the forged documents, the photos of Henry's previous victims, the blood test results showing I'd been drugged, her eyes lit up. "Mr. Holloway, this is incredible. Can I verify these documents with your lawyer?" "You can verify everything. I want the truth out there before the guardianship hearing." The article ran 3 days later with the headline, "Local con man targets elderly father-in-law in elaborate inheritance scheme." It detailed Henry's history, the forged documents, the stolen money, and the guardianship petition. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The whisper campaign against me stopped overnight. Instead, people began approaching me with sympathy and outrage. Several individuals came forward with their own stories of Henry trying to involve them in various schemes. But the most important response came from an unexpected source. I received a call from David Davidson, Margaret's grandson. "Mr. Holloway, I read the article about your situation. I think you should know. We found something in my grandmother's papers after she died. Letters from Henry. Letters that might help your case." "What kind of letters?" "Love letters. But they're not what you'd expect. They're calculated, cold, like he was following a script. And Mr. Holloway, some of them mention you." My blood ran cold. "Mention me how?" "He wrote to my grandmother about researching other potential targets. He specifically mentioned a businessman in your town with a daughter named Leah. This was 2 years before he even met your daughter." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Henry hadn't met Leah by chance. He'd researched me, identified me as a target, and then systematically positioned himself to meet my daughter. Our entire relationship, from the very beginning, had been a setup. I was still processing this revelation when Robert called with news that would change everything. "Bruce, I just heard from the prosecutor's office. They've been building a case against Henry for months, and your article provided the final piece they needed. They're issuing a warrant for his arrest tomorrow morning." Finally, after months of being on the defensive, I was going to see Henry face the consequences of his actions. But as I would soon learn, cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Henry had one final, desperate card to play. The arrest warrant was issued on a Wednesday morning, but by the time police arrived at the motel where Henry and Leah had been staying, they were gone. Their room was empty except for a pile of legal documents and what appeared to be hastily packed suitcases. Henry had vanished, just as he had with his previous victims, but this time was different. This time, there was evidence. This time, the FBI was involved. "He can't stay hidden forever," Agent Sarah Collins explained during our meeting at Robert's office. "His pattern has always been to disappear when things get too hot, but we've frozen his known accounts and we're monitoring his aliases. Plus, he made a mistake this time." "What mistake?" "He stayed too long. Usually he takes the money and runs immediately, but he was so focused on your estate that he kept pushing, kept escalating. Now we have enough evidence to charge him with wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse across multiple states. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was empty. Henry was gone, but so was my daughter." According to the motel clerk, Leah had seemed confused and frightened when they left, but she'd gone with him willingly. "We'll find her too," Agent Collins assured me. "In cases like this, the victim often doesn't realize they're a victim until their abuser abandons them. Robert leaned forward. Bruce, there's something else you should know. The guardianship petition has been withdrawn. Without Henry here to push it forward, and with the criminal charges filed, Leah's lawyer dropped the case. What happens to the money they stole? The FBI has recovered about $60,000 from accounts we could trace. The rest? Agent Collins shrugged. It's probably gone forever. These types of criminals are very good at moving money offshore quickly. $515,000. Gone. 5 years of my daughter's marriage. Gone. My relationship with my granddaughter. Damaged. Possibly beyond repair. But I was alive. I was free. And I was no longer anyone's target. The weeks that followed were surreal. The local newspaper did a follow-up story when Henry was added to the FBI's most wanted list. I received calls from victims of other con men, people who wanted to share their stories or ask for advice. The district attorney's office asked me to speak at seminars about elder fraud prevention. I declined most of these requests. I wasn't interested in becoming a poster child for victimization. I just wanted my life back. 3 months after Henry's disappearance, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. For a moment, my heart stopped. It looked like Leah's car. But when the driver got out, I saw it was Emma, my granddaughter. She looked older, more serious than when I'd last seen her at Christmas 2 years ago. She walked toward me hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Grandpa?" I set down my gardening tools and really looked at her. She had her mother's eyes but my stubborn chin. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, and she looked like she'd been crying recently. "Emma, this is a surprise. I drove up from California. I needed to see you. How's your mother?" Emma's face crumpled slightly. She's not good, Grandpa. Henry left her in Las Vegas with nothing. No money, no car, no ID. He'd been carrying all their documents. She called me from a police station 3 weeks ago. I felt a stab of pain for my daughter, despite everything. Is she safe? She's in a women's shelter. She's broken, Grandpa. Completely broken. She keeps saying she can't believe she was so stupid, that she destroyed everything for a man who never loved her. Emma wiped her eyes. She asked me to come see you. She's too ashamed to call or write. She wanted me to tell you that she knows now. She knows everything Henry did, everything she helped him do. She knows about the drugging, the forged documents, all of it. What does she want from me? Nothing. That's what she said. Tell Grandpa I don't want anything from him. I just want him to know that I know the truth now, and I'm sorry. We stood there in my garden surrounded by the tomatoes and roses I'd been tending. 2 people trying to figure out how to bridge a gap that might be too wide to cross. Emma, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest. Do you think your mother knew what Henry was doing? Emma was quiet for a long time. I think she knew something was wrong, but she was so afraid of being alone again that she chose not to see it. Henry was very good at making her feel like she couldn't survive without him. And now she's learning that being alone is better than being with someone who's destroying you. I know you. I thought about my daughter, sitting in a shelter in Las Vegas, finally understanding the price of the choices she'd made. Part of me wanted to rescue her, to bring her home and try to rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me, the part that had learned hard lessons about enabling destructive behavior, knew that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Is she getting help? Counseling? Yes, the shelter has programs for women who've been financially abused. She's starting to understand how Henry manipulated her, isolated her from everyone who cared about her. Good, that's important. Emma looked around my garden, at my house, at the life I'd protected by making the hardest choice of my life. Grandpa, she doesn't expect forgiveness. She said she knows she chose Henry over you and she has to live with that. What do you think I should do? I think you should do whatever feels right to you. You don't owe her forgiveness just because she's sorry now. You don't owe her anything. That night after Emma left to drive back to California, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and thought about the past year. I'd been punched, drugged, stolen from, legally attacked, and publicly humiliated. I'd lost my daughter, my granddaughter's respect, and nearly $600,000. But I'd also learned something valuable about myself. When everything was on the line, when I had to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation, I'd chosen correctly. I'd refused to enable destruction, even when it cost me the most important relationship in my life. 6 months later, I received a letter from Leah. It was short and handwritten on cheap paper. Dad, I know I have no right to write to you after everything I did. I know I chose Henry over you, and I know the pain that caused. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or help. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything. Henry never loved me. He used me to get to you and I was too blind to see it. You tried to save me and I fought you every step of the way. I understand now why you had to protect yourself from me. I understand why you changed your will. I would have done the same thing. I don't know if I'll ever be able to rebuild my life, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand yours. You were a good father. I was a bad daughter. That's on me, not you. I hope you're happy and safe. I hope you found peace. You deserve it. Love, Leah. I read the letter 3 times, then put it in my desk drawer. I didn't reply. Some bridges once burned are meant to stay that way. A year after Henry's disappearance, Agent Collins called with news. Henry had been arrested in Mexico, trying to run the same scam on a wealthy widow in Cancun. He'd be extradited to face charges in multiple states. The legal proceedings would take years, but he would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. What about the money? I asked. We recovered another $120,000 from accounts in the Cayman Islands. It's not everything, but it's something. $120,000 out of nearly $600,000 stolen. But I found I didn't care about the money as much as I'd expected. I'd learned to live without it, learned to find satisfaction in simpler things. My garden, my books, the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on my own terms. Emma visited twice more over the next year. She never mentioned her mother, and I never asked. We were rebuilding our own relationship, separate from the wreckage of everything else. On a warm spring morning, exactly 2 years after Henry had punched me in my own doorway, I was working in my garden when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's number. Grandpa, I have some news. Mom's been accepted into a job training program. She's learning to be a medical billing specialist. She's been clean and sober for 8 months, and she's living in transitional housing. That's good to hear. She wanted me to tell you something else. She's not going to contact you anymore. She's not going to ask Emma to be a go-between. She said she's caused enough damage, and it's time for her to figure out her own life without involving you. I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because I didn't love my daughter, but because she was finally taking responsibility for her own choices. Grandpa, are you okay with that? I looked around my garden at the life I'd built after nearly losing everything. Yes, Emma, I think that's exactly what needs to happen. After we hung up, I went back to my tomatoes. They were coming along nicely this year, healthy and strong, like me. Henry had tried to destroy me, but I'd survived. More than survived, I'd learned to thrive again. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction, even when that someone is your own child. I'd learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And I'd learned that starting over at 62 was not only possible, it could be the beginning of the best years of your life. As I worked in the afternoon sun, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. No one was manipulating me, stealing from me, or lying to me. No one was planning to hurt me or use me. I was free, and freedom, I'd discovered, was worth any price I'd paid for it, even the price of losing my daughter to her own bad choices. Some battles are won not by fighting, but by refusing to lose yourself in someone else's war.